But I'd like to talk to you about the George Washington Masonic Digitization project. I'll just bring this up. What I'd like to do is give you about 15 minutes of an overview of this project that the Memorial Association has undertaken over the last 6 or 7 years, and then show you the actual product that we've done. The first and foremost question you may have is how much does it cost to digitize Grand Lodge proceedings? And the price is approximately 25 cents a page. And I'll have more information on that. So let me begin by giving you a few minutes just to think about why it's important to digitize proceedings, why it's important to preserve Masonic history, and part of the project that the Memorial Association undertook in 2006. So I want to begin not as a Freemason nor as a Masonic historian, but simply as a historian. The broad topic of this presentation is the need for Freemasons to make their history, philosophy, and activities known to the broadest public possible. And I gave a portion of this talk to the Conference of Grand Masters in 2006, and I feel a part of it is still relevant today. And if you wish to read this entire article that I wrote, or talk that I gave, it was published in the Scottish Rite Research Society Plumline, Volume 5, 2006. Brent Morris got a hold of that paper. I gave it when as a Blue Friar talk at Alec Masonic Degree Week. First, let's look at how American Freemasons Masonic information, its historical record, was organized and available in the past. Most Masonic libraries, such as this one, was established in the 19th century, when communication often took days and transportation took weeks. In the earliest 20th century, it made sense that every Grand Lodge and many local lodges had large repositories and books to serve its members. But with Amazon and UPS and FedEx and now Kindle and other services, it's often easier for Masons to buy a book online or read it online than it is actually to worry about getting a hard copy or going to a Grand Lodge library. So that causes an issue about usability and viability and need for libraries. But the purpose is to still get the information out there. On the broader scale now, though, most Grand Lodges, bodies, and Masons have websites and are posting information and historical articles. And Masonic education committees, which many of you are members of and chair of, publish books and periodicals and papers, and host states and local Masonic awareness and educational conferences, such as today and the one over at the Scottish Rite. All these programs are worthy and necessary for the understanding, but when viewed as a whole, they reveal more chaos than order in many cases. Simply encouraging such activity is not and will not solve the problems of Masonic education and more especially public perception of the craft. In fact, they often cause more confusion, dilute the quality of information, and exponentially duplicate work. As a historian and the curator at the George Washington Masonic Memorial, the number of things I've heard and said and read and asked me about George Washington Freemasonry would boggle the mind. And there's so much duplication of work and so much confusion about Washington's role as a Freemason. So to understand this dilemma, just look at the various websites and the lists of famous Freemasons that you find on websites in the United States and around the world. Who is listed as a Freemason and how and why and who is not. And it just becomes quite confusing. In short, Masonic information is largely written and published by Masons for Masons and then distributed only to Masons. Masonic libraries are posted on websites. The product of Masonic information, therefore, is designed for the producer and not for the real consumer. And my point of view and my argument as a historian first is the professional scholar is the consumer that we should be aiming our information towards. Freemasonry, therefore, as I mentioned, should present its history according to the consumer rather than the producer. And the economy of the professional scholar may be best understood as gold digger fever. And what I mean by that is graduate students, doctoral candidates, academics, and public scholars are constantly prospecting for new and undiscovered archives, that is letters and photographs and diaries and business records and membership listings and meeting minutes, etc., that when such undiscovered archives are found, scholars rush to stake a claim in these archives. They rush not necessarily to find knowledge, which of course they do, but they also do that to make a living. And although eager to learn, they are also hell-bent on exploiting the archives to secure scholarships and grants and fellowships and teaching positions and academic reputations and tenure. This description sounds cynical on one hand, but an honest explanation of the process of how knowledge is dispersed is important to understand, and when we think about digitizing proceedings and promoting Masonic information. Just as gold comes from the earth and through stages of refinement and craftsmanship it's sold as jewelry, so does knowledge mined by scholars. So when a scholar discovers a new archive, they refine it into research papers and presentations, dissertations, books, which beget academic books, and those books beget exhibits and popular books and novels and documentaries. And lastly, that information is exploited into the mass media, such as internet and History Channel and the Discovery Channel programs, so that the public perception over a period of time has changed. It's a long process, and this is part of what we as Freemasons often confuse. We think that by promoting a list of famous Freemasons, or promoting or simply stating the history of the Grand Lodge of Illinois or Wisconsin or Iowa, that the public's perception is automatically changed, when in fact it takes often years to do that in a very considered, very specific and premeditated way to bring about that change perception. So the information revolution, however, has changed this in many ways. Information has now moved from glacial speed to light speed. So when you think about Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, which is the last sort of biggest, greatest development in Freemasonry's public perceptions, those ideas that he put in that book had floated around for years. But as soon as Dan Brown wrote a novel about it that caught the fire, everybody in the country suddenly knew about these ideas of Rosslyn Chapel, et cetera, et cetera. So as a historian and an archival prospector myself, I'll tell you that Freemasonry, that we are sitting on the mother lode of all archival repositories in the United States. Indeed, no other American volunteer association has Freemasonry's fully documented historical record dating back to the 1730s. What's more, this seam of information that stretches across all geographical areas through every race, ethnicity, political class, political party, religion, and American culture. There's not a place in the world, there's not a place in the United States where Freemasonry does not exist and has not existed since the beginning. This Grand Lodge is older than the state of Iowa. The first lodges in the Iowa Territory in Burlington, my hometown, predate everything else in Iowa, everything. So the central problem that confronts scholars prospecting for Freemasonry's mother lode is that there is no central access to Masonic history. Moreover, when scholars attempt to enter the Masonic vein of information through the myriad of Grand Lodge and general Masonic websites, they are confronted with the confusion of facts and Masons with divergent levels of knowledge and particularities of Masonic bureaucracies. So while the craft, in many cases, is still operating in a carbon-copied mimeographed age in many ways, the vast amount of information waiting to be appreciated is almost wholly accessible. How often, I don't know how often you receive these, but I get emails and phone calls every week from people who want to know if their grandfather was a Freemason, and I can't tell them because I work at the memorial, I don't work at a Grand Lodge. And they're even confused about how to contact. I had one woman, I shouldn't diverge because I only got a short amount of time, but I had one woman who called me, whose grandfather died, and she was a Michigan Freemason. And I said, well, you should just contact the Grand Lodge of Michigan. Here's the phone number. She goes, will there be anybody there to answer the phone? I'm like, well, yeah, it's a full-time operation. Well, are there any Masons left? And I pulled out my pentagraph and I said, yeah, there's about 35,000 Freemasons in Michigan. And I didn't want to get in it too hard because her grandfather just passed away. But I'm like, so there's this perception that, as if you know the great broadcaster Harry Carey would say, there's people who think Freemasonry went out with high-button shoes and that we don't even exist anymore. So the way we can prove that is by presenting our history and knowledge up front and make it as accessible as possible. So how should Freemasonry serve the professional scholar or an honest researcher in the digital age? First and foremost, researchers, the public, and even Freemasons do not necessarily need more websites, educational committees, or research lodges. They are, however, in desperate need of one unified place or a few unified places to start their journey from ignorance to the light of Masonic knowledge. What they need is a rock-solid, honest, and open source that will guide them to the most credible information and the best person to answer their questions and the greatest repositories of knowledge. Such was the reasoning behind the memorial undertaking the Masonic Digital Project in 2006. By offering to the Grand Lodges the means to cheaply and efficiently digitize searchable proceedings online, the Memorial Association would provide a great service to its members and fulfill the mission. In other words, rather than expecting Mason scholars and the public to seek thousands of Masonic websites, ask numerous Grand Lodges and Masonic bodies, or knock on Masonic library doors, the Memorial Association website would provide it was a place where anybody can begin to research and understand American Freemasonry through Grand Lodge proceedings, which are the primary documents, the document of record for the history of Grand Lodge and the history of Freemasonry. Through this portal, the visitor would find a fraternity with a transparent, well-organized history that provides countless avenues to greater knowledge of American culture. The George Washington Masonic Memorial remains, in my opinion, the logical Masonic institution to be that virtual portal. First, because it's dedicated to George Washington, the father of our country, the man who truly brought order out of chaos, and our most admired brother. Second, the 52 Grand Lodges and every Masonic organization built and support the memorial today. The memorial is therefore symbolically both symbolically and physically located to be in a neutral point of entry. Indeed, it is the one institution where every Mason can collectively labor to gather, organize, and present the history, philosophy, and activities to scholars and the American people in the world. And to make that a little more clear, what I'm saying is through the memorial's website, or through the memorial because it is a philanthropy of the fraternity, scholars and other people can move through that portal into Grand Lodge and local lodge and other pennant affiliate bodies. So it's not trying to monopolize, it's simply trying to be a portal into something greater. These opinions, which I first expressed and presented in 2006, were approved by then President of the Memorial Association, Mike Brumback, past Grand Master of Indiana, and the Executive Director, George Sakers. In September 2006, the Memorial had a meeting with Masonic representatives from various Grand Lodges to discuss several projects, and those intended including Grand Secretaries, Masonic librarians, and various experts on information technology. The attendees agreed that the Memorial was well suited to recommend informational technology and specifications. Furthermore, the attendees also agreed that OCLC, which is a world leader in this technology, which stands for Online Computer Library Centers, their database system called Content DM was an excellent system to begin digitizing proceedings. Between 2006 and 2010, the Memorial went full speed ahead on this project, and within 4 years, the Memorial had assisted and served the Grand Lodges of Washington, Oklahoma, New York, Massachusetts, and Nebraska to digitize the proceedings, and I'll show you them in a minute. However, problems occurred with Content DM functionality and front end. It didn't search well, and it was very clunky, and it moved slow. And that was partly due because the Memorial staff, that is myself and the Executive Director, George Sakers, did not have the technological expertise. Between 2010 and 2012, the Memorial turned to James Fiesel as a technical consultant to continue the project and keep it moving forward. Brother Jim, well, he's my most worshipful brother, Jim Fiesel, digitized the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, Alabama, and Ohio's proceedings. Despite Brother Fiesel's expertise, the Content DM database system we used was still very problematic, and it was not until worshipful brother Sean Iyer, standing to my left, was hired a couple years ago at the Memorial. He brought his expertise as the Director of Communication to bear to fully understand and to resolve the Content DM's functionality problems. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, but fortunately, Sean was able to recommend a new software system called Luna, which I'll show you in a minute. And over the last few months, we've been transferring the project, these digitized proceedings from the various Grand Lodges completed, into the new Luna system, and we've added those on, and I'll show you those in a minute. During this process, the memorial suspended adding any further individual proceedings, that is, new proceedings from the last few years or full sets. And to make the project all the more successful, the association has recently purchased its own digitization machine and all other necessary machines to do it in-house. And originally we farmed it out and subcontracted it. Then we tried to bring it in-house with James Fiesel to do some of it, and he was still subcontracting out. Now we've purchased all the equipment necessary to do it in-house. We bought a machine that can cut the bindings of the books. We bought a machine that will jog the pages into shape. We bought a scanning machine that will scan 200 pages a minute or 400 sheets. 200 sheets or 400 pages in a minute, and the computer software necessary to do everything necessary to digitize proceedings. So if a Grand Lodge or any Masonic body wishes to digitize, they would simply have to send us the books and the check to pay for the processing, and we would do everything in-house, everything in-house. And when you're digitizing, when you're scanning 400 pages in a minute, you can go pretty fast. In the meantime, while we were sorting these out, Most Worshipful Brother Simon Laplace, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge Connecticut, requested a pricing and a proposal to digitize his Grand Lodge proceedings, and he has since sent his proceedings down to us. We have a contract signed with him, and when Sean and I return from heaven, Iowa, we will then set up everything necessary to start this learning curve to understand how to actually digitize proceedings ourselves. So with some blood, sweat, and probably a few tears on my part, I should be fully competent in being able to digitize proceedings in the next 3 weeks or so, God willing. And again, with the process, once the learning curve is done and we understand how to go through this in a very industrial fashion, we should be able to digitize books very, very quickly. The good news is the memorial, we have duplicate sets of many York Rite proceedings. We have duplicate sets of many publications in the past, such as the New Age magazine. And we have a lot of other books we could be digitizing, such as the Conference of Grand Secretaries, the Conference of Grand Masters proceedings, the Pentagraph books. There's a huge amount of stuff that the memorial would like to produce, but more especially we want to work with Grand Lodges and any Grand Masonic body or jurisdiction possible. So in conclusion, and I'm sure I have it here someplace, I have done a page count for every Grand Lodge in the United States, and I can give you a ballpark figure of the number of pages of your Grand Lodge proceedings, and then you can calculate approximately 25%, and that would tell you how much it would cost approximately to digitize your proceedings. The other way I would tell you about that is the way we digitize is the way that you want to digitize. So if your Grand Lodge had the money and you wanted to digitize all your proceedings, or you were your Grand Chapter, Eastern Star, or whomever, however you wanted to allocate funds to do that, that's how we would do it. So some Grand Lodges have just written a check and everything was paid for and it was done up front. Other Grand Lodges allocated in their budget, their educational budget or the PR budget, $5,000 a year or $2,000 a year or whatever, and they would say, how many books do we get done for $5,000 a year? And I would say we can do from 1870 to 1890, and as they did it in installments over years, then all the proceedings done. The Memorial Association undertook this project as a service to the brothers, as a service to the members. So the Memorial Association project continues to serve Grand Lodges and Master Masons. So however you all see fit to want to participate in this project, the Memorial is happy for that opportunity to serve you. So in other words, everything is negotiable. The ultimate goal here, of course, is to be able to have every Grand Lodge, every Grand Body proceeding digitized, including Grotto, Shrine, Councils of Deliberation, Eastern Star, whomever, and wherever to include, so that one can search through all years, all states, all pages, all names, and instantaneously, right? So that's the dream. I'm going to show you how some of this works, and I still have about 15 minutes. Sean Ayers here. He is far, far smarter than me in all these technical aspects. So if you ask me a question, chances are I'll just be pointing to him. Just deflect it. I'll just deflect it. But I want to show you a few things, and then if you believe, and I hope you are, I hope you have confidence in yourself that you are smarter and as educated on on this sort of technology. We would welcome beta testers or other people who really want to get into this to help us improve the functionality. Right now, we've made a couple improvements, but there are still some other aspects that we need to get to make it fully functional, which I know that the company that Sean, that we've contracted are working on. So if you go to the website, to the memorial's website, this is the front end, gwmemorial.org. If you go to Digital Archives and click on it, you will see the list of proceedings, searchable online proceedings, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Ohio, Oklahoma, Washington. And then we're still in the process of transferring over from the old content DM system into the new system, New York, Nebraska, West Virginia. And the MSA digitized their Twain Awards applications a few years ago. And then also we have annual reports from the George Washington Masonic Memorial Association as well, completed by a year, right? And then there's more information down here in my contact information, my email address. So I thought of a few things I wanted to search for. So this is Massachusetts, and this is a portal that we go into. So Massachusetts had 5 volumes that they reprinted of all their proceedings, because obviously the proceedings go back to actually 1733. And we have a process where we're going to have to divide those up into individual states, years. But if you go into, say, Ohio, here's all the years of Ohio that we've divided out. And some of them, like you see 1808 at the very top, that's still, because those early proceedings were only a few pages, they were reprinted. We haven't subdivided them yet, but they need to be divided individually. But if you go into 1904, for example, this launches you through our website into the Luna software. So what you see here is the book. And if you go up into the corner, you see the Grand Master, and you just flip through pages. Right? So you can read the book as you would like to. And you can also do it individual pages and enlarge and then zoom. Right? So the way that you, and then up in these corners, these are the preceding, the before year and the after year. So in the center, 1908, this is 1907, this is 1909. And then the search engine here, so if this is Ohio, so who do you think of when you think of Ohio? You should think of Taft, of course. No research results found, but surely we can find something like Lima. No. So searching, so page 20, and it should, oops, let's see, let's try this. So proxies issued November 20th, 1903, I issued my proxy to past Master William H. Melville of Lima, Ohio, to lay the cornerstone for the first Christian church in Cincinnati, in the city. So just this example, I just picked out one thing. This is extraordinary for a couple reasons. First of all, the Grand Master is telling what he did, but you now know that there was a cornerstone ceremony done for the first Christian church in Lima, right? And so if the Grand Master's back in Lima again, as a Grand Secretary or speechwriter or whatever, you can now find out how many cornerstones in Lima were ever, or any city, wherever your Grand Lodge is. But also if you ever get any guff from anybody from the first Christian church about Freemasonry, if they're anti-Masons or whatever, you can say, we've been doing cornerstones for your church, for your congregation, for your denomination for over 110 years, right? But it also, so this is the kind of stuff that you just immediately find. I can search for cornerstone and bring up every cornerstone that the Grand Lodge of Ohio ever did in its history. Now, there is a couple issues there because sometimes cornerstone is one word, sometimes it's hyphenated, sometimes it's capitalized, and depending on the font that's used, especially if you have a proceeding from the 1850s or before versus proceedings in the 1950s or after. The quality of paper, the font style, the print itself is going to cause some problematics. But the fact that you can do this is extraordinarily helpful. So then you go into collections and you can go through the other Grand Lodges. I've done a lot of research in the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts because I'm a past master of Massachusetts and my mother lodge is in Burlington. So one of the things that I discovered, and I'm just this type of person, it should be, so if you search over through here, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, these are all the books with the covers that you bring up. Right, and we're going to work on this. We want to get a proper cover that has Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and the seal. When we digitize them, they just use the spine. Right, so if you click on it, it should bring up a summary of what you're looking at, and it will bring open the book. So this is 1883. Right now, our system is set up to be able to search individual years within the Grand Lodge, but Luna is providing the ability for us to search across all years within a Grand Lodge. So it should be very possible soon that if you can click on Ohio and Nebraska, you should be able to search in both of those Grand Lodges at the same time. So if you had a brother if you had a man who was made a Mason in Ohio, and then he moved to Nebraska and joined a lodge there, you should be able to find his name in both places by typing it in. Right? So you should be able to then select which years you want to look at and which Grand Lodges you want to look at. And depending on how large this project grows, so for example, if you did the Grand Lodge of Michigan, the Grand Chapter, the Grand Council, and Grand Commandery of of Michigan, and you typed in one person's name, Robert Connolly, for example, or Walt Wheeler, or David Bedwell, or whomever, you should be able to search and find out if these guys were also members of the Chapter, Council, and Commandery by gathering them in one spot to search, right? And that would then support or improve whatever membership database you have. Because there's two sources to prove that a man was a Freemason, right? You have to be able to prove that he was a member of a lodge or he wasn't a Freemason. And if his name shows up amongst the necrology or list of lodges in a proceeding, that also demonstrates he's approved. So, for example, how do we know that George Washington was a Freemason? Well, we know that there's a minute books that list his initiation, passing, and raising. But when he died, the Grand Lodge of Virginia's proceedings for 1800 in their necrology list Washington as amongst the dead, and his lodge, Fredericksburg No. 4. So that's how we know Washington was a Freemason. So your proceedings verify and confirm an individual who was a Freemason. We have 2 minutes. So I can take a couple questions real quick. Yes, sir.
Use the mic.
Please use the mic so I'm able to state your name and jurisdiction.
Right. As soon as there is one.
Yeah, hand that mic back to that. Oh, he's got one. Okay.
I got one.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So.
You won't be able to hear it just through the proceedings.
You had said you would take these books and break the spine.
Yes.
And does that destroy the book forever, or do you put this historical record back together?
So the books that would be common, 1950, 1974, there's numerous copies of that. The memorial, we keep a pristine set. We have a complete set of every Grand Lodge proceeding in the United States. But yes, you would sacrifice a copy of the 1950 proceeding to guillotine the spine and take it apart. The rare and valuable stuff, like in the memorial, we have the 1826 Grand Lodge of Illinois proceeding, of which there's maybe 2 copies known in the world. We would obviously scan those individually, and there would be an extra fee for that, and we would work with the Grand Lodge and find a way to do that. The Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, for example, purchased, because they're digitizing local lodge minute books, they actually have the ability, which I think the Grand Lodge of Iowa has, where you can lay it on a cradle and you take pictures and you turn pages and you so nothing is destroyed. I'm a historian, we would never destroy anything unless we knew there was multiple copies of it, right? Other questions, real quick? I'm here. I have to go over and give a talk at 11:30 to the other conference on George Washington. But Brother Sean is here if you have more questions, and I'll be around all day. So by all means, if you're interested in this, contact me. You can always contact me at the memorial, and be happy to work with any Masonic body whatsoever to digitize their collections. Thank you, brethren.